Welcome to the Cinephile Hissy podcast, the tirade-filled movie debate podcast hosted by two film critics, two cool dads, and two basking in the sun teachers. I'm Don Shanahan.
I'm William Johnson.
Folks, we're damn glad to have you. This is all for tantrum's sake, where shared passions and high fives wash away any place for hate. In the end, we encourage you all to love what you love. But for now, the gloves are off and the hissy fit is on. This week, we're talking about the classic 1973 George Lucas film American Graffiti, recommended by the 5-star letterbox drop-in William Johnson. Our format is this: the recommending lover goes first. That's when William Johnson will get 5 uninterrupted minutes to shower his praise and state his high-minded case. The hater, which is a little bit of me, you'll see, follows with 5 uninterrupted minutes of his own to present their counterpoints with any manner of intellectual scorched earth. After that, we will open it up for 15 minutes of shared discussion where the hissy fit really gets chippy. Start your engines, rev it up, get your best girl, pop in a soundtrack, and get your judge's scorecard. You'll see who wins this one with American Graffiti. Folks, let's go. William, how you doing, sir?
Doing great. I just got back from Disneyland. My first visit to Disneyland. I've been to Disney World a number of times as a Florida resident, but this is my first time at Disneyland. I went to the Avengers campus, that was the primary reason I went. And we had a great time. Some of it was really fun. I got to see, since I'm a Marvel completist, I got to see finally the essentially the short film that James Gunn made. This is topical because I believe this week, when this episode premieres, is the opening of Suicide Squad. But James Gunn directed a number of Guardians sequences for the ride Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, which was my favorite ride there. And I'm only bringing up Walt Disney because he happened to have won 22 Oscars, which is 22 more than American Graffiti. So
correct, and for good reason, as I will get into in my 5 minutes.
Oh boy.
Okay. All right, Will, you are the lover. You got your 2 minutes of Marvel shillness out of the way. Tell us about American Graffiti.
Indeed. Okay, so I'm going to start my clock. Believe it or not, I have my own clock today.
Ooh, I'll take care of the bell, my man.
All right, so American Graffiti. I am a latecomer to this. I'm not going to lie. George Lucas, as many people do, I have a complicated love-hate relationship with the man. I think that he is a brilliant storyteller, not a great screenwriter. When you look at the best Star Wars film, Empire Strikes Back, it was not written by George Lucas. The story was by him. That's one of the reasons why it is the best Star Wars film. But the man created Indiana Jones, for Christ's sake. I mean, this guy knows how to tap into something. Maybe he just doesn't know how to put it into words, and that's okay, because if he has somebody else to do it for him, you get something great, like Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So because of the prequels of Star Wars, I was a little perturbed to dig into George Lucas's filmography. It's just something that I grew up with Star Wars. For whatever reason, I never saw his other films outside of that, the Star Wars oeuvre. But something was calling to me. One of my favorite subgenres of film is the hangout film. I also adore a film that takes place in one day and is so well produced that it feels like you can't tell what year the movie was made, in the year it's listed that it was made, or the year in which the story takes place. Some of my all-time favorite, hangout movies that have that kind of mix of you can't really tell when this was made is Dazed and Confused, Richard Linklater's amazing film, which I still get confused was not made in the 70s, even though it was made in the 90s, because it was so you're so enveloped in the time period and what they're presenting. Same thing with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which we talked about on our very first episode.
Hmm.
So American Graffiti is that kind of film. It kind of hits all the check boxes on paper for me. It's a hangout film. It has it's set in a more of a romanticized time period, um, and uh, and it takes place in one night. So off to a good start. I decided, you know what, I have to see this classic. It's on a lot of people's lists. It was a I'm also in a new wave, a Hollywood new wave period right now. Where I'm kind of revisiting or visiting for the first time a lot of films from the '70s and late '60s. Um, and I got to say, I was utterly charmed by this film. For one, even though George Lucas wrote the screenplay with two other people, it's very clear in the making of that he kind of came up with the concept, wrote a couple of basic things, but let the writers do the writing. But what he also did, which is something that he definitely did not do on the Star Wars prequels, was he kind of let his actors, which is an impressive troupe of actors, um, a lot of great young upcoming talent, um, uh, very few you know, like legends in the field or whatever. And we're talking about Cindy Williams, Ron Howard, Richard Dreyfuss, Paul LeMat, and of course, one of my all-time favorites, Harrison Ford, in a very early role here, before he would become kind of a uh, hallmark of Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas productions with Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Apocalypse Now, and The Conversation. Um, just a great cast that kind of gets to go off on its own, kind of do its own spiels. But it, like I said, I think that the excuse me, I think the winning formula here is that it is so uh, engrossing in terms of putting you in the time period of 1962 that you can't tell that the film was actually made in 1973.
Hmm.
It's very I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. It's just really takes you into that world and you don't want to leave it. It's that one night you're in that world, you can put it on in the background and kind of feel like you're comfy and at home. Great actors, and dare I say great director, who really tapped into his childhood with this film. And in the end, that's what George Lucas has really done. When you think about Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and American Graffiti, he taps into childhood pleasures that you can still enjoy as an adult. I know I kind of went off on George Lucas for a little bit, so I'm going to end my 5 minutes here.
Well, that was nicely done. I tell you what, I know I come into this in the hater slot here, but this is admittedly one of my mother's favorite films. And condolences to your mom. My mom is still with me, and she's one of those ladies of that era. You know, who she just turned 70 this year, who raves about this movie. In 1973, she would have been 22 years old, and this would have been the prime of her, just coolness era as a Midwestern person. And then obviously in 1962, she would have been 11. I don't know how much she would have remembered the car hops and the hot rods and all that, but this is something she loves. And we were an oldies station listener all throughout my childhood. If it wasn't country, it was oldies. So this movie is near and dear to the Shanahan family heart, at least a little bit. I come at this movie, I don't want to say indifferent, but I respect it on a couple levels. I respect that it's the hangout movie and obviously predates Linklater with all that. And I respect the diegetic use of music and the idea of it going back. It's 11 years to look at a bygone era, especially when you consider I'm a social studies teacher. I can kind of play this card here a little bit. America in 1973 wasn't a very great place. Like if you go backwards, it's Vietnam, it's the Democratic National Convention and Civil Rights of '68, it's Martin Luther King's assassination, it's John F. Kennedy's assassination. All that stuff happened after the events of this 1962 set film. So to be able to have Lucas, use his creativity and use his, I hate to say nostalgia because we overuse that word a lot today, but
Mm-hmm.
to have him go back and tell this really really cute and really adorable and still in a couple places really meaningful one night only or one wild night movies, it plays well and it works. And it works all right. The hard part for me is, and as great as it is, because it's this launching pad for different things, it's it's to me, I don't like to use the word overrated. I know it gets tossed around a lot. We throw it out in college basketball chants and all that, but on the AFI's list of 100 years, 100 films, 100 movies, American Graffiti is number 62. It's ahead of Network, African Queen, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Unforgiven, Clockwork Orange, Saving Private Ryan, Shawshank Redemption, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, Silence of the Lambs, All the President's Men, Forrest Gump, and a zillion other things between number 63 and 100. And I don't think this movie is anywhere close to being better than those other 38 films. Not even close. When you go to the 100 Years, 100 Laughs, I don't even call this movie much of a comedy. This is a classic. I know we didn't use the term in 73, but this is a dramedy because you have the heavy themes of growing up in angst and all that, but I'm not laughing out loud at this movie. This movie is number 43 on the AFI list of 100 Years, 100 Laughs. It is just after Big, and at number 43, it is ahead of a whole bunch of things that include far better films like City Slickers, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Fargo, for goodness sakes, Bull Durham, Nutty Professor. There's just a zillion things to me, Beverly Hills Cop, that are just better than this movie. Is it very good for what it is? Is it a great nostalgia trip? Yes. Is it that level of all-time benchmark five-star thing? Absolutely not. Cute as a bell, fun as a button, but it is not a top 100 film on that kind of level. And like I said, I appreciate the effort, and I completely respect and understand that it took this great success to kind of establish this trope of the hangout movie, likely before most hangout movies came around. And shout out to Feel and Film podcast with Aaron White. About 3 years back, he and I did this movie for a little series we were doing on the side called Connecting with Classics, where we really broke this movie down a lot. And both of us kind of were at that place where it's in the Hall of Very Good, but it shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And that's how I feel about it even still now. I didn't rewatch it. I know this movie too well and too great. I love the playlist and the soundtrack of songs and the whole diegetic thing to it. And I know it was, as a scoreless movie, it plays in a lot of different levels of being different from other stuff, especially with that Hollywood new wave you're talking about. But you dropped the 5 stars in this. This is like a 3 for me. Like I said, Hall of Very Good, just not the Hall of Fame. And for that, I don't even need the other 25 of my seconds. I'll do this back and forth in the 15 minutes, but I'll stop my little bill now. Folks, in the meantime, we will break for a short announcement from our non-corporate partners and friends.
Hey, this is Charlie, Triple C, from Brevity Box, a new and interesting podcast from the Ruminations Radio Network. If you're a fan of podcasts, we have a lot of great content to offer. Come check out our diverse group of podcasts and hosts at ruminationsradionetwork.com.
All right, Will, those are my 5 minutes. How you feel about this?
Well, I love the story about your mom because she would have been the same age as Mackenzie Phillips in this film, because Mackenzie Phillips was 12 when she made this, so she would have been kind of that. Maybe, like you said, she like that character is the one who kind of gets to be the bigger kid just for the night, because she kind of sneaks into the hot rod guy's car, the for the evening. So I think that's cool that your mom got to experience it that way. It's the same kind of thing, both with my mom and my dad. My mom got to basically be Sally in Mad Men. She got to kind of relive through the 60s and 70s through Sally's eyes on Mad Men. And my dad was, uh, for Dazed and Confused, he was in high school when those kids were in high school. So it was kind of like a flashback for him. So
Mm-hmm.
I totally get that prior generation.
Yeah.
Um, and it happens for me too. I was a senior in high school when American Pie came out, and they were seniors in high school, so I kind of
Right,
followed
right.
their trajectory.
Oh,
So I think
sure.
so I think that's another reason why it has that classic status, is because there was a lot of people in that time, especially the younger generation,
Mm-hmm.
that came out with the American New Wave.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
they
disillusionment of I keep thinking about that 1973 time where America likely needed that breath of fresh air of reminding themselves what it was like 11 years ago.
Mhm.
It's as if somebody in 2008 made a movie about 1997 and how how fun and cool it was for whatever it was 97, Friends, and like you said, American Pie, and some of those things from 1999, and then 2 years before 9/11. How fun were we in the Bill Clinton years compared to the George Bush years of war on terror and the fear and the jingoism and all the phobias that propped up in this country. If someone made a cool movie like that, I guess Super Bad would be the closest thing, but even that's taking place in its current era. It's not a throwback, period piece.
Yeah, well, and the reason why I compare this a lot to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is for two
Mm,
reasons. One is because, I mean, this is something that maybe was very obvious to viewers who had seen the film, but since I had just watched it a couple weeks ago, I was amazed. I was like, wow, Tarantino lifted a lot from this film in
yes, he
terms of
did.
that. Um, However, also what I wanted to say is that both of those films deal with a time of quote unquote innocence ending because of some kind of new event.
Hmm.
What I like about American Graffiti is that it does capture this romantic element. I'm sure everything in 1962 wasn't peachy keen, but
No, no, no.
what it does it kind of puts in like bookends to certain parts of history. So for American Graffiti, it's the eventual Vietnam War,
Hmm.
um, and the death of JFK and
Yeah.
Camelot. Those are kind of the events that would you kind of know when you're watching this film. You go, okay, so these kids, the ones that get out of town, maybe. I think in the end credits, you actually see
Oh yeah,
um,
the classic end credit stinger. Yep.
one of the uh, one of the male characters. I think the nerdy one
Hmm.
ends up going to Vietnam and being killed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a dampener on on the film,
Hmm.
when what is mostly a feel good film. But I think that's kind of the point. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the same way, with 1969 being when Easy Rider came out and things were starting to change in the film industry. The whole
Right.
idea of what an actor was changing, and then of course the murder um, of what's her name,
Sharon Tate. Yeah.
Sharon Tate. That kind of changed this kind of idea of celebrity, that they were not untouchable anymore. They could
Hmm.
be murdered. So I kind of like that these two films have that aspect to them, and that's why I give them
Sure.
5 stars, because not only do I feel like I'm in that place in American Graffiti's case, 1962, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 1969,
Hmm.
but but it's also universal. Like when I'm watching American Graffiti, I can kind of see. I think back to I'm 39 now,
Hmm.
but I think back to the time when I was in high school and there were still those guys that were hanging out
Oh
with the
yeah.
high school kids that maybe should have moved on. There was those kids that were. I went to a very elite prep school for high school, um, so not to brag, but I'm just saying that like it was very tough to get in. It was very tough to stay in, and some of
Hmm.
the and I was like one of the lower students in terms of grades and opportunities and things like that. Some of the smartest kids at that school, the ones that made it all 4 years, had
Yeah.
4.2 GPAs. Some of them didn't do anything.
Right.
There's that whole idea of wasted youth, either by choice or by circumstance. In this case,
Sure.
you have the and I'm terrible with names, but it's the kind of the hot rod driver, the guy who's like the best drag race driver. He's kind of the Matthew McConaughey of this movie.
Yeah.
He's old. He's kind of stayed in town.
Yeah. That Paul
Um,
Lamont character. Right. Right.
all
Right. John
about
Milner.
yeah. He um, obviously has kind of overstayed his welcome. Is kind of missing his shot at life. But then you also have the nerdy character who will
Hmm.
eventually lose his life in Vietnam uh, through no choice of his own.
Right.
So I kind of like that. So even though the film is lighthearted, I agree with you. It's not a laugh out loud comedy.
Hmm.
Um, there,
Dramedy. Classic dramedy.
I would say a dramedy. There is a what I like about it is that you can put it just like Dazed and Confused. You can put it on in the background and get a nice
Oh yeah.
chuckle out of it.
I agree.
But when you sit down and watch it, you can get so much more, both from that time period, the time period it was made, and the time
Sure.
period in which you're watching it. I think that's why it's a 5 star film, because
Yeah.
it is effective in 3 decades,
I
in
I
my
see you
opinion.
there. Now, since you opened up the since you open up the trump, in this game of euchre we're playing on this show here to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
Hmm.
I will take this movie to that movie every day of the week and twice on Sunday because these are good regular people and not superstardom and rewritten fairy tales where Sharon Tate lives and all that bullshit that Tarantino does, which on its own merit is the fun nostalgic fairy tale and that trip into that era, and obviously a huge appreciation for that era. I'll take this movie to that movie because it feels 800 times more genuine.
No, character wise, I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think that's always been a problem with Tarantino
Oh
anyway.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Is
that's why we love him, and that's all right.
right. So yeah, I go to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood more for the experience of hanging out with some larger than life characters. But yeah,
Sure.
if I really want to feel something, even though I can't remember their names, I
Hmm.
I have more of a connection with the characters from American Graffiti in terms
Yeah.
of emotions.
Oh
The
sure.
fact the fact that the fact that Richard Dreyfuss and Ronnie Howard, he's credited as Ronnie in this,
Hmm.
the fact that they kind of switch roles throughout the night
Yes.
is one of my favorite aspects of the film because Dreyfuss is the one who's kind of like, I don't think I'm going to leave, and Ronnie Howard is very much like, yes, we've got to leave. This is going to be awesome, and then they switch, and I really enjoyed that. Um, but it deals with. I mean, I go through this list of topics that it deals with. I mean, Blink 182, the pop punk band,
Hmm. Hmm.
wrote this really interesting song called "Going Away to College" on their seminal album "Enema of the State." And what it was about was it was like, what happens when these kids who are in love with each other in high school, they go off to college and separate. Like
Sure.
it's not necessarily because they want to. They still like each other or love each other, depending on how serious your relationship is.
Yeah.
But it's just this weird circumstance where it's suddenly like, hey, you got to leave. And I like that it addresses that with all the couples in this because some of them don't want to
Yeah.
break up and some of them do. And, it doesn't shy away from sexuality. I mean, it does it in a George Lucasy way so that it's not
Right. And
overt,
it
but
well no, but it also does it in a 1973 couldn't make it today kind of way too. You got the
right.
12-year-old girl in the racer's car where, that's a red flag in today's day and age.
Well, not only is it a red flag, but if
Couldn't
you
even get
guys,
off the page today.
if you guys just researching this film, if you guys really want some disturbing stories, just read Mackenzie Phillips Wikipedia.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
That will disturb you
That's
for all
true.
time.
That's true.
Um,
No, actor wise, I'm with you. There's good journeys here from good folks that play. I don't want to say play the archetypes, and I think maybe the end credits make them into archetypes. Like, oh, that's the guy that made it. That's the guy that didn't. That's the guy that died. And before the end credits, epilogue little epilogue notes. These characters, the jeopardies of what they are going to be are in doubt all night, and that is fascinating. And Ron Howard was a legit 19 making this movie. Richard Dreyfuss was the oldest looking 17-year-old in the world at the age of 26 making this movie. Yeah, he's got no business being in here, but I digress with something like that. No, I admit I admit, I was going to ask you this question, kind of to close, as we get closer to as we finish this piece here.
Mhm.
Which high schooler were you? Now, I'm that guy who I, I had my high school girlfriend junior year, didn't have a girlfriend senior year. I did have a car, and to me, a car was wings, to be able to get around
Mhm.
and do things. And I went to a small town, midwestern town, where we cruised and we had our scene for all that. And not that I thought my car could ever get chicks, but I thought it could.
Mhm.
But I admit my mom is that person who never left town. Still lives in still at least until this past year where she retired, lived
Mhm.
in the same town she grew up in, graduated in, went has classmates and friends, does all the hometown things. She'd be one of those girls in this movie. I'm the guy who I guess counts as the black sheep, where I had high hopes. Was that guy who went to college, first in my family to really put, to kind of do, the only person in my family to kind of do that other than my mom, who did college, but then went right back to her hometown. And then, yeah, I'm the city slicker now because I'm a gravel road country boy who lives in Chicago doing podcasting and movie reviews. And,
Mhm.
I teach kids of color and all that. So I, I, I don't know what my epilogue would look like and which character I am. Part of me is Ronnie Howard, where I'm like, trying to figure out What do I do with my relationships? Do I really want to come home? Part of me is Charles Martin Smith as the nerdy guy in the glasses who wasn't going to score chicks and needs to figure out the floating between groups and all that. Which one were you? If you like, we're talking about identifying. Which one were you?
Well, I definitely wasn't Paul Lamont.
No, me neither.
I wish I was Bob Falfa, Harrison Ford,
You're
because
yeah, me too.
who doesn't want to be Harrison Ford?
Right.
Because you know what, he loses that drag race in the end, but you know what, he's still Harrison Ford in the end.
You're damn right.
So, I'm gonna say I definitely wasn't Ronnie Howard, because Ronnie Howard is more of the he's kind of the big man on campus. Like, he seems to
Hmm.
be the most popular kid in terms of, like, everybody knows him, everyone wants to hang out with him, all the girls want to date him, kind
Yeah.
of thing. Um, I would say I was a mixture of Richard Dreyfuss, because Richard Dreyfuss was kind of he was popular, but like he also was
Hmm.
like friends with the teacher, and he wasn't like so popular that like people were like, "Oh, you got to stay in town," or we hope you
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
He was kind of middle of the road. Like in high school, everyone knew who I was, but I wasn't like man about town. So I'd say it's a little bit of that,
Hmm.
a little bit of Richard Dreyfuss, and definitely Terry, or Charles Martin Smith, the
Yeah.
nerdy
Yeah.
character. I definitely was a lot of him just because of my nerdy interests. I was in the heavy metal club, but I also loved science fiction, Star Trek. I used
Hmm.
to write sci-fi stories for the newspaper, for the school newspaper, and so I kind of had these eccentric tastes that a lot of people don't want to admit. Another thing about my high school, just so you know, is that it was an all boys high school.
Oh
So
dear.
it's a lot of testosterone, a lot of people wanting to
Uh
be
huh.
tough and cool. And I mean, at least Richard Dreyfuss, I think he had he had lots of cool girls that wanted to
Hmm.
hang out with him. Across the street from my school was the all girls school. And
All
so
right.
that's how we did all the dances and stuff. We coordinated with them. But
Nice.
you had some boys that were able to just walk over to the other campus and be fine. You had
Hmm.
me that was entirely nervous, more like the nerdy character, because I was like, oh my god, I'm going into the estrogen layer, like I didn't know what to do
Right.
with myself. So I would say a mixture of Dreyfus and Charles Martin Smith
Okay. Okay.
would be my thing there. Um, Another thing I wanted to bring up is one thing I love about film history
Okay.
is I love the idea that something in a film that you really don't think about um, ends up like changing the landscape of film. So like in ways that you don't think of. So for instance, like I was telling a lady friend of mine that in Back to the Future 2, that what's his face, Crispin Glover was not in the film. They used footage of him, and because they
Hmm.
did that without his permission, that created the whole image rights, and that created a whole new system of how to use footage of you in your likeness and things like that. Um, according to at least the IMDb trivia, so let's see how accurate
Right.
that is. But one thing about watching older movies is the credits are like 10 seconds long.
Oh yeah. Totally.
Um, According to the trivia, anyway, George Lucas, it says here, George Lucas was unable to pay all of his crew members, so some of them were given screen credit in lieu of payment.
Oh my.
So at the time, it says that only department heads received screen credit. But now that so many crew members got credit, that is why closing credits now last so long, because now it is tradition, what George Lucas started, to give everyone in the company and everyone in a unit credit now.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty, like, I like
Okay.
that idea that's something that goes on, is that this film also, much like Easy Rider, decided not to have a score.
I dig
Um,
that about this movie.
yeah, so the fact that it's a wall of sound essentially
Hmm.
is um, really intoxicating, because, like I said, it feels like you're listening to a Wolfman Jack, a night with
Hmm.
Wolfman Jack, because
I know.
it's just wall to wall music, and interludes, and I guess they were real interludes from the Wolfman Jack show. So those were real callers from 1962 and things like that. So
Yeah. Now, Oscar wise, just to kind of put the closing note on this, yes, this movie won 0 Oscars. It was
good.
nominated for
5.
Best Picture, nominated for 5, lost Best Picture to The Sting. And it was also up for Best Director, Best Screenplay based on Best Original Screenplay, Best Supporting Actress for Candy Clark, Best Film Editing. It did win the Best Picture Musical or Comedy at the Golden Globes, which is surprising to me because you're up against this thing. But yeah,
Mm.
it's I wouldn't give an Oscar to this anywhere. I guess editing is very tempting because of the way you have to take these vignettes and put them together. It's definitely different than probably something like Distinguished probably won back in the day. And have you seen? I'm guessing the answer is no. This movie has an awful 1979 sequel that kind of takes the notes of this epilogue and turns them into actual stories, where you have the post-Vietnam thing and the older Ronnie Howard thing. Have you seen more American Graffiti?
I have not, and I have no interest in seeing it.
Ooh,
Um,
even with the 5-star rating of this, come on.
because to me it feels like and we'll go back to contemporary films of this era. It's like
Hmm.
Easy Rider, Another Ride, or more Butch Cassidy and Sundance, or
Yeah, yeah.
it just feels
Every
like,
Jaws sequel, right?
yeah, it feels like they're trying to capitalize on
Hmm.
something. I like the idea on paper for more
Sure.
American Graffiti, but I don't think it's something I'm going to pursue anytime soon,
Yeah.
especially because it doesn't have the involvement of the creators. I think this is very much a George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola production, and I think
Yeah.
that comes through.
Coppola Coppola helped bankroll this as a friend and inner circle person of Lucas, and ever since, Coppola's been in that tight group with Lucas, where Coppola's one of the first guys Lucas ever shows his movies to. He's kind of in that inner circle, and the money, because this made a great amount of profit.
Oh
The
yeah.
money from this money from this helped Lucas establish what would be Lucasfilm, Skywalker Sound, and Industrial Light and Magic. So without the success of this movie, we very likely would not have Star Wars, and I will tip my hat to that.
Well, back to your Oscar thing, real quick.
Yeah.
I think that traditional film people did
Uh
not know
huh.
what to do with sound at this point.
That's
So
fair.
I think that the fact that it didn't have a score threw some people off. But to me, the use of engine noise,
Hmm.
music, the input of Wolfman Jack segments,
Right.
the dual dialogue segments. I think this should have got at least some sound nominations. Um,
Yeah. I mean, you can if you do yeah, editing is the right place for me because you're merging a bunch of things together, and that's where I'll be
mm,
like, "Ooh, yeah, that's a good spot for it." I mean, for Best Picture, yeah, The Sting is The Sting, and you have The Exorcist up there. That was definitely not going to happen. What did it lose in editing? Here, I'm going to look up here on Wikipedia because I'm in that spot here. So, Best Sound, which wasn't Best Sound went to The Exorcist, and that makes sense. And then best editing went to, yeah, because it always matched best picture all the back in the day. It went to the Sting. So yeah, all right, all
well,
right.
I will say that Candy Clark, who was
Mm-hmm.
nominated, what an interesting year for her in that category. I don't think she necessarily deserved an Oscar nomination.
Right.
I think with ensemble cast, it's very tough.
Mm-hmm.
See
Mm-hmm.
Lord of the Rings, where all the acting is
Oh yeah.
phenomenal, but you can't single one out.
Right.
But so the winner that year was Tatum O'Neal, who was
Mm-hmm.
10.
Yep. For
Uh,
Paper Moon.
Linda Blair was nominated. She was only like 12.
That's right.
You had Madeline Kahn, and then
Mm-hmm.
I believe you had Sylvia,
Sylvia Sidney.
who was kind of an old school at that point. I mean,
Right.
she had been around since she was around in the 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So so you kind of had the old guard, really new guard,
Right.
and then you had this one. But
Yeah.
so
I
an
think
interesting year.
I think between Blair and O'Neill, the right person won because those are if Paper Moon's really good. It's a good showy part for a kid actor,
Sure.
and of course Linda Blair is iconic at this point for Exorcist. What else you got for closing thoughts before we hit the outro, man? I'll leave it
Well,
to you. You're the lover.
yeah, I am always frustrated with you because I feel like you don't appreciate the Hangout film.
Oh no, I do. Like Days Confused is a 5 for me because it
Oh, it
does
is a
everything
5.
that
Okay.
Days Confused does everything this movie does, but better with far more interesting characters.
Mm,
I'm just saying, I'll take between the two. I'll take Days to Confused. Here we go again, every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
well, see, here's the thing. I grew up with Dazed and Confused, so I would prefer it as well, just because of the comfort food that it provides.
Sure.
But all the three Hangout films that I mentioned, I've given all those 5 stars. So it's tough for
Oh,
me.
okay. No, I mean, where are you at with stuff like Can't Hardly Wait and Go and stuff like those 90s ones in our era?
Yes,
Even Superbad.
they are, and Superbad. Yes, they are a cut above for me because of the subgenre. I'm a fan of that subgenre. I like the night of stuff like
Yeah,
Training
me
Day.
too.
Training Day fits into that subgenre. It's a
Oh,
one
sure.
day only thing.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I love that subgenre. So for me, Can't Hardly Wait is not like a great film,
Hmm.
but it is a comfort film because I like, for some reason, and I really like the idea. And if you can do it well, just like Linklater does in Dazed and Confused, and George
Yeah.
Lucas does here, and Tarantino does in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
Oh,
if
boy.
if you
That's
can
not a one day.
if you can really, I know that's not a one day, but it's a hangout
No.
film.
Yeah,
It's
different
it
genre there because then I'm
if
going to different places.
But what I'm saying is with that is like the slice of life kind of stuff. If you can do that to
Hmm.
the point where you feel like you're in that world even for 2 hours, 3 hours,
Yeah,
and it takes you out of your current, hell of life,
sure.
I will. That's why I give it 5 stars, because when I watched American Graffiti, finally, it transported me, and
Okay.
that's why Lucas is so successful, because when you watch an Indiana Jones film,
Hmm.
it feels like you're watching an adventure serial. When you're
That's true.
watching Star Wars, you feel like you're
Yeah.
watching an adventure serial. American Graffiti is the same thing.
No,
So
he molds that well.
exactly.
If I'm picking a top one wild day or night movie, it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, hands down. Chicago bias for sure,
Yeah,
but
you
that's
definitely got a Chicago bias on that one.
yeah. But no,
Uh,
that for me is the what a day, and that's all fun, all flight, all fancy. It's the best. But that's me. All right, we did good, man. Thanks for coming on for this one.
yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna send us out. So
Hmm.
I want all of you to follow us on Twitter at Cinephile Fit and on Facebook at Cinephile Hissy Fits Podcast. We're also on Instagram. Don runs the Instagram a little bit more than I do, so he's going to show you some cool stuff about like press screenings and stuff.
That's
I'm on
right.
I'm on Twitter, usually just going off on a bunch of bullshit. Also, find us on Letterboxd. I'm putting a lot of Letterboxd stuff together, so you guys can enjoy that content. Um, Thank you so much for your captive audience and social media participation. Cinephile Hizzy Fits is a 25YL media podcast. It's brought to you by ruminationsradionetwork.com. Please visit, rate, review, and subscribe. If you enjoyed this show, we have more where that came from with interesting hosts, and we will have some wonderful guests coming up. We can confirm. Um, so look forward to that. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere you find your favorite shows.